Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Faith Forum. We are delighted to have Rabbi Jill Arvin with us this morning. I'll give a little introduction to this last three forums of our season. As our communities reckon with and begin to recover from the worst months of the ICE occupation, St. John's is devoting these last three May forums to rediscovering ways of finding courage in community. We are doing this by exploring how the three Abrahamic faiths have found courage through communal spiritual practices of resistance, resilience, and restoration over generations past, present, and yet to come. Our speaker this morning will be presenting on finding courage in community in Judaism. Rabbi Jill Arvin is the Senior Educator and Director of Campus Affairs at the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas. Her work centers around supporting Jewish students, staff, and faculty on college campuses and working to improve the campus climate for all students. She's originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, received her BA from the University of Minnesota in 2004, and was ordained by Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in 2013. Following ordination, she spent 10 years working as a congregational rabbi at Bet Shalom congregation in Minnetonka, Minnesota, serving as the rabbi, educator, and associate rabbi. Over her years in Minnesota, she founded You're Jewish, a home-based Jewish organization, and has served on the board of Minneapolis Jewish Federation, Minnesota Hillel, and on committees for the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, the Overseas Committee at Federation, and was co-chair of the Minnesota Rabbinical Association. Join me in welcoming Rabbi Jill Arvin.
Good morning, everybody. It's so wonderful to be here with you on this Sunday morning for this really wonderful series on a beautiful topic. I know that different faith communities have different practices for how they, begin a study session, in prayer and blessing. So in Jewish tradition, we offer a blessing before we engage in any type of study. And because the topic this morning is also related to supporting the community, I'll offer that blessing as well. And so I'll offer it both in Hebrew, first in Hebrew, and then translate it into English for us. So this is sort of framed as our introductory blessing prayer before we engage in a text study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah v'la'asok b'tzarchei hatzibor. And that means we praise you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who gives us life and who commands us to engage in study, to engage in words of Torah, and who also commands us to be responsive to the needs of the community. So I pray that as we are joining together in study and in concern for the community, that we can turn to each other and turn to sacred text to think about how we can have the courage to do this sacred work. Amen. Amen. Okay, so if you didn't grab a source packet, maybe you can raise your hand and okay, looks like everyone took. You guys know what to do. So I have prepared a source packet for us, and I think what my style, because we don't have a ton of time together, and I want to make sure we get through the content, but I also want to make sure that we're engaging and you can ask questions and be in conversation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of use this as sort of a teaching. I'm going to walk us through it, and then at a few different points, invite conversation and question. But what I have found is that if we invite question and comment after each text, we might only get through like one or two texts. I don't know. That's what often happens. So I'm going to walk us through a number of the sources, and then we'll kind of be in dialogue together, and feel free to ask questions. So I think, first of all, this is a beautiful prompt, a beautiful series. And I think especially thinking about what we've all been through here in Minnesota the last few months, the idea of what does it mean to find courage in community is, from a faith lens, is really powerful. The approach that I'm taking is I'm kind of bringing us back through sort of historic sacred text, and then relating it to sort of our contemporary experience. And so we're not going to necessarily be looking at texts, contemporary texts, though we could have done that. But I think hopefully this will give us sort of a broader, more expansive look at the source of in Judaism, around what it looks like to first of all engage in community, and then sort of later bring in the themes of sort of resistance and resilience. So the first three texts that you see, we're not going to go in the chronological order. We're kind of jumping around a little bit. Pirkei Avot. This is from what's called from the Mishnah, which is early rabbinic literature. So we're talking about after the destruction of the Second Temple, and sort of in the years sort of 100 to 200 of the Common Era is what is the time period of these texts. So I would love to. We're going to read all three of them, and then I'll kind of unpack why I chose these three. These are from a book that's called like The Sayings of Our Fathers, and so it's a lot of like wisdom literature almost. So does anyone like to read out loud? I won't make you read the Hebrew. We're gonna we'll only do the English today, but if there are Hebrew speakers, you got the text. Sorry. Yeah, please. Yeah, would you like to read for us in English? Yeah, just the first one. Joshua
ben Perahiah and Nittai the Arbalite received the oral tradition from them. Joshua ben Perahiah used to say, "Appoint for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a companion, and judge all people with a scale weighted in their favor." Nittai the Arbalite used to say, "Keep a distance from an evil neighbor. Do not become attached to the wicked, and do not abandon faith in divine retribution."
Okay, so it might not seem like the most obvious like first text to choose, but I wanted to start us off by sort of laying the groundwork for what it means to the charge, like when we're from a Jewish lens of how we should engage with other people. So this text is saying, essentially saying surround yourself with people who you can learn from, and acquire companions, judge people favorably, but also distance yourself from evil, right? So it's a really interesting way to think about what does it mean for us to develop community, and like think about who do we want to be in community with. It's not, it's an interesting, we can get, I want us to kind of like keep all these things in our mind as we progress through the text and think about what does this mean for us today? Because you could read this text in multiple different ways, but I think this, sort of from the get-go saying, try to, when you're engaging in the world, surround yourself with people who you judge everyone favorably, but try to surround yourself with people who you can learn from. Okay, so let's go on to the second. Anybody? Yeah.
Hillel said, "Do not separate yourself from the community. Do not trust in yourself until the day of your death. Do not judge your fellow man until you have reached his place."
Okay, great. And then do you want to just read that next one also? Ben Zoma.
Okay. Ben Zoma said, "Who is wise? He who learns from every man, as it is said, 'From all who taught me have I gained understanding.'"
Okay, so again, we have similar themes. Try to learn from everybody. Who is wise? Someone who learns from everyone, right? So be open, have an open mind. And the one before from chapter 2:4. This is a very, this passage is quoted very heavily in Jewish tradition. The first line, do not separate yourself from the community. So this idea that in order to live a flourishing Jewish life, you need to be connected to the community. You can't be Jewish on your own island, right? And so community is essential. There's another text we're going to get to that emphasizes that. And then the second half of that text, this do not trust in yourself until the day of your death. That's really, and like, what does that mean, right? Like, that seems really harsh. I think some of the commentary on that is saying, you can't connect it to the line that came before it. You can't trust only in yourself. You need to be checked by other people. So you need to be part of a community that can support you, sharpen you. There's another text that says iron sharpens iron. So you want to be in dialogue with everybody in order to, don't be so firm in your views that you can't learn from other people. And that sort of supports this final one. Who is wise? Someone who learns from everybody. Okay, so I'm going to pause actually. Anybody have any questions or comment? These three texts kind of go together. Anyone have any questions or commentary? Has anyone seen these texts before? Relate to anything yeah.
What popped out at me was Hillel, because it's the Hillel House of the University.
There you go.
It's nurturing and
right.
Speaks loudly for community.
Exactly. Yeah. On college campuses, it's very common for there to be what's called a Hillel house, which is a Jewish student group on college campuses named after this Rabbi Hillel. So there was Hillel and Shammai were sort of the two big rabbis, heads of schools at this time period, and Hillel was known for sort of first saying, I am going to engage in my dissenter's opinion first. So Hillel was known to teach Shammai's opinion before his own. And that sort of was what actually made him become the more prominent rabbi, was that he taught the other perspective first. And so so anyway, any other comments or questions? Okay, can turn the page. These next two top texts might be more familiar because they're part of the shared canon between Judaism and Christianity. So we have one text from the book of Exodus and then one from Isaiah. So anybody want to, now we're kind of moving in a slightly different direction. The first page was all about our need for each other, our need for other humans, other opinions, why we need each other. And then this is going to move us in a different direction. Anybody want to read the Exodus text?
Sure. Then whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. But whenever he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady until the sun set.
Okay, so this is just a really beautiful teaching about how we can support each other. I could have started with this, but I wanted to zoom us out. So here we have this really beautiful example of, Moses, his hands growing heavy. And we know that when he holds up his hands, the people are prevailing. When he let down his hands, the enemy prevailed. But what does the community do? Like, how was he able to hold up his hands? Only because he had Aaron and Hur supporting his hands and lifting them up. And so this is has anybody studied this text from a Christian lens? I don't know if this is, Yeah, so, it's not the most commonly cited, story, right? Like, you're not gonna, this is sort of an obscure, like, it's, as noted, it's something that doesn't really get emphasized as one of the big biblical moments. Oh, Moses has two people holding up his hand. Like, that's not, might not seem that exciting, but really it is in the context of this topic and thinking about what does it mean for us to be successful. We always sort of lift up Moses as sort of this amazing prophet who and yet, like, he needed support. He couldn't have been successful if it were not for the people who were like standing under him, just literally holding up his arms. That's all they were doing. It seemed, but it was the thing that allowed him to prevail. Any comments or questions about that?
We all need help.
We all need help.
Yes.
Yeah. So we all need people standing on each side of us. Exactly.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that, I mean, okay, it's not one of those texts that just immediately jumps out at us. It also occurred to me that I've never read this ever.
Okay.
And it just realizing how we know certain parts and that. And
Correct.
others, so I'm really grateful that you pointed this out.
Yeah, it is true, and that's the same, in Jewish circles. So everyone reads the part that came like right before this, where the Israelites are leaving Pharaoh and the 10 plagues and the splitting of the sea, and then it's like, okay, this big moment happens, and we study it, and most people know that story of the sea splitting, but what happens after, right? They have to, it's sort of this idea in Judaism that we talk about a lot, that liberation is not the same thing as freedom. And so yes, the Israelites were liberated from slavery, but then what? Then they're wandering in the desert and they're trying to live, they're trying to become a free people, and then we get stories like passages like this that we don't often spend a lot of time on, but they're so important. Yeah.
So our church has a daily office, morning prayer, daily office.
Oh, okay.
And this was either this week or last week.
Oh.
But the problem is, it's like, this is a small section.
Yeah, of course.
We read
So,
several paragraphs,
Right.
so it kind of gets lost in the.
That's exactly the point. It kind of gets a lot, like, you wouldn't normally stop at this part. But when you're thinking about what it means to be support, how do we do the work that we're trying to do? Like, Moses couldn't have done it without Aaron and her, and so we often just sort of take that for granted, but here, we're really focusing on it. So beautiful. Okay, let's go on to the Isaiah text. This is also sort of just pulled, I don't want to say it's not out of context, but it's just, we get these small passages, that of Isaiah sort of speaking to the people. Anyone want to read this passage from Isaiah?
I'll read it.
Yeah, thank you.
Each one helps the other, saying to his fellow, take courage. The woodworker encourages the smith. He who flattens with the hammer encourages him who pounds the anvil. He says of the riveting, it is good, and he fixes it with nails that it may not topple.
Okay, so I really was looking for a text like this, and I was like, this is perfect, because this speaks to why I love this topic so much. Oftentimes, if you were just to sort of put out a sort of an open question, where do you find courage, from a Jewish lens? And this is probably obvious and likely similar from a Christian faith tradition, that you would find courage from God. And there's hundreds, thousands of texts that talk about faith and find, when you're facing a difficult situation or when you have fear, find courage in God. And our topic is finding courage in community, right? And so they don't need to be opposing. They go together. But I wanted to provide a text that directly names, our prophet saying, take courage, saying to his fellow, take courage. The woodworker encourages the smith, sort of this idea that is in some ways the minority of the biblical text. Like I said, hundreds and thousands of examples of like, find courage in God, find courage in God. And here we have find courage in the woodworker encouraging the smith. So I wanted to provide this. I don't know if anyone has any reactions to this text from Isaiah, or sort of my commentary on, again, I don't think they are opposing, they sit side by side, but the fact that most of our text is encouraging us to find courage from God. Any comments or reactions? Yeah.
I was reminded that courage is contagious.
Yeah.
It's contagious from other people, that you see them being courageous, and then you get a little extra courage yourself.
Beautiful. Yeah. I love that. Exactly. Yeah.
That we have different skills and different
Yes.
gifts, and that when we stand in solidarity with one another across our gifted differences,
Right.
I mean, we encourage each other to use our gifts for
Right.
love and care of community. That way,
Yes.
both thrive.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I think during Operation Metro Surge, seeing 50,000 of us together and, 20 below
Yeah.
weather, was extremely motivating.
Right.
Kept us all
Yeah.
doing more
Yes.
and feeling good about it.
Beautiful. Yeah.
One
Yes.
of our bishops who's in Washington DC wrote a book, How We Are Brave. And it's very interesting, and she's also has worked with a youth director
Yeah.
writing a version that's available for children.
Beautiful. Wow. Amazing. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving us along. So I'm gonna get through definitely a few more of these. So this text at the bottom of the page, this is a Talmudic text. So more rabbinic literature. So this is gonna be a little bit later, like 600, 700 of the Common Era. Would anybody like to read? Yeah. one sec.
If one lives in city for 30 days, he must contribute to the charity platter from which food is distributed to the poor. If he lives there for 3 months, he must contribute to the charity box. If he lives there for 6 months, he must contribute to the clothing fund. If he lives there for 9 months, he must contribute to the burial fund. If he lives there for 12 months, he must contribute to the columns of the city for the construction of a security fence.
Okay, any reactions to this? I'm sure this is probably new to most people. Any reactions? Yeah.
It shows this sort of sense of how community develops.
Right.
By how long somebody has been, and step by step, they have to be really drawn into the community through this
Right.
responsibility.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I think it's also a caution that as someone is entering into this community, to not overwhelm them with different asks.
Yeah.
Just go gradually.
Yeah, beautiful. So
Well, the other thing we just finished tax season.
Yeah.
This is. So, table A, right, big column, such and such, and then you do this, and then if you do that, then you got, it's very legalistic.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the rabbinic literature can come across as very legalistic because they're trying to sort of give instructions for how the community should live together. So I wanted to bring this one thinking more directly related to immigration and Operation Metro Surge and sort of the term, the term that got sort of coined like neighboring, and what are our responsibilities to each other when we live somewhere. And sort of thinking, I had a few reflections, also sort of this idea of like, what is your responsibility when you are newer to a community is lower than your responsibility when you've lived somewhere for a longer period of time. And I also was just reflecting, on, I know everybody has so many personal stories to tell and to share, but I know that I heard so many stories from people, first of all, everybody wanted to help, right? Like this idea that everybody is responsible for helping in some way. I think that sort of very much came through with this idea of like neighboring. And also there's this idea that everybody is obligated. And I know I personally had so many experiences where the people who we were helping wanted to help others. And, that just this desire, this sort of human desire to help other people in whatever way was appropriate. And I think, obviously this was written in a very specific context and, 1500 years ago. And so, but I think this idea that we all are responsible to give, but in different ways, right? And sort of this idea of thinking about what are your responsibilities to your own community when you live somewhere for an extended period of time. Yeah.
It also reminded me that this is related to discovery.
Yeah.
After Metro Surge,
right.
or during, thinking, where can I contribute the
right.
most? I mean, what are my gifts? What is my calling in this particular context?
Yes, beautiful. Yeah, and I think, the fact that it starts with food, and you think about what we experienced and how so many people, the number one thing was helping make sure people weren't hungry, right? And the number of people doing grocery deliveries. So, it sort of like puts in order of like, food is number one, right? And then clothing, and, it goes kind of on and on. So it's exactly. Any other, yeah.
Well, on that point of different things and it grows. It doesn't just grow bigger, but the kind of things differ in how grounded they are in the community. Food is something we need, everybody needs on a daily basis.
Right.
And clothing is like you're there a little longer, the climate.
That's right.
And burial is as you get closer to death, these people. And so the longer you're there, the more intimate and grounded you are in the community.
Yes.
And so your gifts take on a different kind of focus and need.
Exactly. Yeah. And I also, this was written in a context that, was this sort of hyper local, like we often use that term. I know in the last few months that like the work that was being done was hyper local, and that's the context that this was written in, this idea that communities really were, the people who were physically living around you. And I think that it had, in American culture, like we sort of have in a lot of ways moved away from that, where how people define what their community is or who is part of their community is not necessarily defined by who actually lives near them. And I think that the last few months in many ways has sort of brought us back to, not brought us back, but it's sort of it has given us sort of a taste of like this text was written specifically like who is living near you and what are your responsibilities to the people living right around you. And I think that is something else that we experienced during this time that is, I think, at least unique in the last 30 plus years, probably more than that in America. Okay, so let's move along. Okay, we're going back to Exodus, which maybe is familiar, which is good, maybe feels familiar to people. So I wanted to do two more from Exodus. Anyone want to read chapter 18? Yeah.
But when Moses' father-in-law saw how much he had to do for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing to the people? Why do you act alone while all the people stand about you from morning until evening?" Moses replied to his father-in-law, "It is because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, it comes before me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make known the laws and teachings of God." But Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The things you are doing is not right. You will surely wear yourself out and these people as well, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone."
Okay, so this might be more familiar to people, but it felt just so important in this context, that it's, we need each other, this sort of decentralized leadership, right? Like that Moses clearly is the leader, right? He's the prophet, he is leading the people, and yet he has Yitro, his father-in-law, Jethro, who's telling him, you can't do it, like it's not working. Like you got this huge line of people who need you need to delegate, right? And so I think that, this is, again, like going back to this idea of community and how communities function well and how they're effective in creating change. You can't just have one leader, right? And so that, again, I'm like thinking back to the last few months and how I think that the success of sort of the resistance or whatever you want to call it was the fact that there wasn't just like one person who was like leading it. It very much was this sort of decentralized model where you had everybody, multiple people leading in small ways, and that this acknowledgement that the task is too big for one person. And so I think this is a beautiful text that talks about that need. Yeah.
Oh, and I think it is important for all of us, particularly here, is the learning.
Yeah.
And understanding.
Yeah.
And you can't know somebody else's suffering, but we're
beautiful
in our face.
Yeah, beautiful.
And that's a gift to us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that this leads to is when you're talking about what's going on now with the dispersed. This happened like with Occupy Wall Street. It drove the press nuts because who's the spokesman?
Right.
What's your plan? And there wasn't one.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to. The press does not know how to cover that.
Right.
And so it still has troubles with that.
Yeah.
It has no way of understanding how a group community comes to a group decision. Right. And as a press, it doesn't know how to handle that and cover it.
Yeah, beautiful. Great. Another great example. Okay, so let's continue on. If we had more time, we could spend more on each of these. So this is another text from Exodus. This is the beginning of the story, and I wanted to choose something that was like specific to resistance because there's so many different themes. But here's an example of resistance. Okay, and it'll have a communal aspect to it as well. Anyone want to read? Yes, please.
The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shipra and the other Puah, saying, "When you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live." The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live.
Okay, so let's. I want to read the commentary. This is a contemporary commentary written sometime in the last 50 years. So let's read that and then I'll talk about it a little bit. Anyone want to read, starting with "It must be borne"?
Yeah. It must be borne in mind that the Torah shows us that within a sea of wickedness and tyranny, precisely next to verse 13, which shows Egypt, the kingdom and the people.
Yeah, sorry.
In their wickedness, how an individual can stand against wickedness, rebel against the order, not obey it, and not absolve himself of the guilt of murder by saying, "I received an order from my king."
and righteousness or wickedness is not a result of national or racial affiliation. And just as Ruth and Naomi came out of Moab and Ammon, so these two righteous women came out of Egypt.
Okay, so this is clearly an act, right, of resistance. And what the reason why I loved this so much is because I think that it, even though when you go back to the original text, the Exodus text, and you see, verse 17, the midwives, it says fearing God, right? So that goes back to what I was saying before about how there's that God is giving them courage. And also there's this idea that if it were just one, would they have done it? Right. And so there was something about the fact that there were here where it says there were two, right? Shifra and Pua. If it was just one, would they have had the courage? Maybe not. And so there's this idea that yes, they had the fear of God and that gave them strength to resist, but also they needed each other. And that actually, if they didn't have each other, they maybe wouldn't have had the courage to do it. So I was like, this is the text. This is the one that I think sort of brings a lot of this together for us of saying, that again, we can't do it alone. Like it's strength in numbers that they felt maybe because they were doing it together, they were resisting together, they had the courage to actually do it. So I don't know, any comments or questions on this text? Again, I don't know if this is familiar to people, but yeah.
The interesting thing is they named the women.
Right.
They have a real name.
Beautiful,
They're
yeah.
Individual.
Oftentimes women don't.
Right.
Yeah.
So, who's Moses' father?
Right. Yeah, I know. We get exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. We know his mother, but we don't.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Any other comments on this? Yeah.
I think at a time when heteropatriarchal nonsense is killing the entire world, we need more women. We need women to resist, women to be those life-saving agents of hope and healing and courage in community.
Yeah, so it's so beautiful and so perfect. Yeah, I think it's not an accident, right? That these are, two women.
Yes.
And so we can take a lot of strength and courage from them. And, they took courage from each other and God, and we can, take inspiration from them. Okay, we're doing really well. So the last few times, I don't think we're going to get to maybe all of it. I debated whether to include this because I actually don't fully agree with the complete message of the text, but I thought it was important. And so this is more of a contemporary text. And so I want to dive into like this idea of like what are the different types of communities that we have, and then how are those things good and what are the challenges of them. So again, we're going to read it and then I'm going to tell you why I don't fully agree, which is very Jewish. Like we engage, and you don't have to take every, the idea is to wrestle, right? To wrestle with text. So I think there's a lot of wisdom from this, even if I don't fully agree with it. Does anybody want to read for us in order to explain? Okay, yeah.
In order to explain the difference between a people of fate and a nation of destiny, it is appropriate to deal with a different contrast. That between the encampment and a congregation, the Torah used both of these concepts with respect to the people of Israel. Make for yourself 2 silver trumpets of hammered work, and they shall be to summon the congregation and for causing the encampments to set forth.
Okay, so I'll just like give some clarity here. What they're about to do is distinguish between the word congregation and encampment. There are 2 different words in Hebrew. And so then they're quoting, this is what happens with this type of literature. They will quote the primary text, which in this case is from Numbers, the book of Numbers. And they're I know this isn't like a Hebrew lesson, but they're identifying two different Hebrew words that are used, and the translations. So the Hebrew Ada, they both mean community. They're both used to describe a community, but they have sort of different connotations. So Ada, congregation, Machanet, encampment, which that's where I'm like, I'm not really entirely sure that's like the best English translation, but we'll get there. So I just wanted to provide that context. And now let's keep reading just the bottom paragraph on page 4. Anyone want to read it? Yeah, thank you.
Encampment and congregation constitute two different sociological experiences, two separate groups that have nothing in common and do not support one another. An encampment is—
That's where I disagree, by the way, but continue. Sorry. An encampment is created. Third line.
Is created out of a desire for self-defense and thrives on fear. Congregation is fashioned out of longing for the realization of an exalted moral idea and thrives on love. In the encampment, fate's rule is unlimited, whereas destiny rules the congregation. The encampment represents a phase in the development of the nation's history. The continued survival of a people is identified with the existence of the congregation.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot here. I think we have time to read the last page, because I think it'll help. I wasn't sure if we were going to get to it or not, but I think we have time, because then it'll help me sort of unpack. So would anyone like to read this last page? Yeah, thank you.
In man's world too, an encampment is created solely from fear. When faithful, choiceless existence terrifies man, the individual grasps the inadequacy of his strength and aligns himself with others for purposes of self-defense. In order to prevail over a common enemy, the establishment of an encampment is a strategy of warfare. Learn what the Torah has taught. When you shall go out as an encampment against your enemy. An encampment is born out of the terror of destruction and loss, from the fear that fate is overwhelming. From the midst of the encampment, the people arise. In the beginning, the Jews in Egypt were an encampment. When they were freed by the Holy One, they rose to the level of a nation. Indeed, the congregation has a special place in the kingdom of man and in his mighty spirit. The congregation is man's characteristic creation, and his glorious hovers over it. The congregation is not created as a result of negative causes or out of fear of the fate that pursues man who senses his own misery and feebleness, but rather as a result of positive impulses. Destiny is the foundation of the congregation. A congregation is a collection of individuals with a single past, a common future, shared aspirations, identical yearnings for a world that is totally good and pleasant, and a singular and harmonious destiny. The beginnings of the congregation are embedded in the tradition of the people's ancestor at the dawn of its existence. Its end is rooted in a common vision of the end of days. The people of the congregation are witnesses to the events that have passed and to the miraculous future that has not yet arrived. The congregation encompasses not only those who are alive today, but everybody who has lived and who will live from the dawn of humanity until the end of days. The dead who have passed on are still alive within the confines of the congregation, and those destined to be born are already alive within its jurisdiction. A congregation is a holy nation that does not fear fate and does not live against its will. It believes in its destiny and of its free will sanctifies itself for its realization. The covenant of Egypt was made with a people that was born in the encampment. The covenant of Zion was concluded with a holy people.
Okay. So hopefully this kind of helps unpack show what this is trying to teach. So I'll start with my challenge is, I just don't I don't appreciate sort of the negativity associated with encampment. That the way when I read it, I feel that it is being sort of critical of that type of, sort of formation of community. But what I appreciate and why I wanted to include this is because it's thinking about like that we form as communities sort of in different ways. Sometimes we're forming sort of through this lens of like there is an external threat and we have to form as a community in order to resist that threat. And sometimes we are forming as a community and looking sort of forward towards sort of a shared destiny. And I thought it would be helpful to look at this sort of stark, this text that is really separating them in maybe a way that is too extreme. But I thought, for me at least, it was helpful to think about the different reasons that we come together in community, and especially in the context of this topic of trying to turn to community for courage. Oftentimes when we're talking about that, and definitely in the case of, the last few months, we're thinking about this threat that we need community because we are facing sort of an external threat that we need to band together. But I wanted to also say like that it's a yes and, right? Like that is true. And it's not the only end, right? Like that also there's this other component, this idea of having sort of being part of a community and working towards something. And I think that's sort of this moment where we are finding ourselves right now, where it's sort of how do we move forward and maintain the community that we created in the face of an external threat, and work and sort of take that courage and that community and move it towards something that is a more sort of, like what is our shared destiny that we're working toward together. And so that we're not only operating through a lens of like resisting something bad, but also working towards something good. So that's why I wanted to present this, even if I think it's a little bit harsh. Okay, does anyone have any, it's 9:47. I don't know how strict we are with the timing. Does anyone have any comments on this text or questions or general? Yeah, back here.
I think this last reading helps us to caution against exclusivity.
Okay, yeah, I love that. Say more about that.
Well,
but I agree with you.
I think there's a feeling of better than.
Yeah.
And separation.
Yeah.
And once again, right in our face.
Yeah.
Recognize the breadth of the community. And
beautiful.
Are we really part of it, or do we think we have something
beautiful
to offer?
Beautiful. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, the encampment, that reminds me of, I'm old enough. I remember the TV show Wagon Train.
Okay.
Which is a bunch of people coming together.
You'll have to teach me.
Yeah, it's a bunch of people coming together to, cross the Western Plains.
Okay.
From robbers and savages and
okay.
whatever. And so they would come together and they would cross the plains, and then they would get to California, and then they would split up again, and they would form a community where they formed a community only for the process of crossing the desert.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting description. And what came to me was my mother in World War II. And how everything, that's where I felt like the divide made sense. Everything was toward the war effort.
Yeah.
Versus what you're describing with the ice surge. Honestly, I would say, from what I can see, it was an example of the house divided. Because really what was going on was not an existential threat like World War II. What was going on was a civil war in cold form, and a house divided situation that tended to create a sense of encampment, perhaps in ways that weren't always productive. But I do think if a community is facing an existential threat, they spend a lot less time dancing
Yeah,
and feasting,
Yeah.
which is the forward-looking
beautiful,
moment, or they bury the dead without ritual
Right.
because they must survive.
right,
So I found the division quite
Yeah.
meaningful.
beautiful, thank you.
I think the phrase that troubles me is the, I mean, Catholic is created out of a desire for self-defense and thrives on fear. And the
Yeah.
second clause, and thrives on fear, doesn't necessarily follow from that.
Beautiful, I also didn't like that, yeah,
Be a goal for a journey.
right,
So it can thrive on hope as well.
beautiful, thank you, I agree, I completely agree, yeah,
I just thought about memory
yeah,
as well. And that even though there's such a contrast, the congregation is not forgetting.
right,
And I think that's
That's-
really important. Or there's-
exactly.
At least I don't
Both,
pick up any of,
both.
you know, we can't have any of this anymore, but it's a recognition of
Yeah.
roots
I think that's really
and
beautiful.
pilgrimage and growth.
Yeah, exactly. Very powerful. Beautiful insights, everybody. Yeah, so I'm just aware of the time. It's 9:50. I know some of you are heading to worship. So I just want to end with gratitude. Thank you for having me and sharing in this learning together. Everyone had really beautiful insights on these texts. And yeah, I really pray and hope that we can take courage from learning from tradition and wisdom that comes before us and thinking about the different ways that we can turn together in community from, you know, both our faith community, multi-faith community, and our neighbors to find courage from each other in addition to finding courage from God. And I think we need both. So again, thank you for having me, and yeah, have a wonderful.
Thank you.